She doesn't belong here. Sarah has heard it her whole life, in the way certain customers look through her instead of at her, in the way Freehold's finer residents drive past Rosie's diner on Route 9 without slowing down, in the quiet arithmetic of a world that decided early what a girl like her was worth. A red and white uniform. A laminated order pad. Tips left in exact change. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Every single day, she shows up anyway. Because Rosie's is hers in every way that matters, the way the morning light cuts through the grease-filmed windows at exactly 7:14, the way table 4 always wobbles unless you kick the left leg, the way the regulars don't say good morning so much as they say Sarah, and that one word carries the whole meaning. She has worked this floor since 19. She knows every cracked booth, every temperamental coffee urn, and every customer who needs their cup topped before they know they need it. She is not waiting to be discovered. She is not waiting for anything. Which is exactly why she is completely unprepared for the moment the bell above the door does something it has never done in 7 years of Tuesdays. It announces him. Paul Castellano does not do diners. His associates lunch at steakhouses in Hoboken. His attorneys eat in Midtown. His Thursday nights belong to a private room above a restaurant in Little Italy where the menu has no prices and the owner knows better than to linger. Paul Castellano moves through the world inside a perimeter of deference, doors that open without being touched, tables that materialize without being requested, rooms that go quiet when he enters them. But his black Escalade blue attire on Route 9. His driver is on the gravel outside with a jack and a jaw set tight. And the small girl currently death-gripping his sleeve has not eaten since 7 a.m., and she is making that fact known in the particular silent way she has, not crying, not asking, just looking up at him with eyes that could dismantle nations. Kimberly Castellano. 6 years old. White tulle dress, white ribbons, expression like a federal judge reviewing a plea she has already decided to reject. She has her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness and an internal threat assessment system that has humbled women twice her age. She does not want to be here. She especially does not want to be in a diner. She has learned, from long and strategic experience, that diners are the kind of places where her father's guard comes down. And when his guard comes down, women notice. And when women notice, everything gets complicated. Kimberly Castellano does not do complicated. She does controlled. Paul slides into the nearest vinyl booth, picks up a laminated menu without reading it, and does the thing he always does in unfamiliar rooms, he reads the room instead. Trucker at the counter. Retired couple by the window. A table of teachers on their lunch hour. No visible threat. No one who recognizes him, or if they do, no one unwise enough to show it. Then Sarah appears. No designer fragrance. No practiced smile calibrated to impress. Just a red and white uniform that has seen 300 Tuesday rushes, a tray balanced in one hand, and eyes that go, immediately, without hesitation, to Kimberly. Not the watch. Not the suit. Not the man who makes senators nervous. The little girl. Hey, sweetheart. Sarah's voice is easy, warm, the kind of warm that hasn't been performed. You look like a pancake girl to me. Strawberries on top, or are you a purist? The diner keeps moving around them. Orders called. Coffee poured. The grill hissing behind the service window. Kimberly goes completely still. In 6 years of her life, in every restaurant, every penthouse dinner, every forced social occasion her father's world has required her to attend, not one woman has addressed her before addressing him. Not one. They come in leading with a smile aimed at Paul, and Kimberly gets the afterthought version, the pivot, the "oh, and aren't you adorable?" Sarah didn't pivot. Sarah started with her. Kimberly stares for 3 full seconds. Then, slowly, reluctantly, as if the gesture costs her something she hasn't fully calculated yet, she gives the smallest nod in the history of nods. Strawberries on top. Sarah writes it down and walks back toward the kitchen. She does not glance over her shoulder to see if Paul is watching. Paul watches her the entire way. And Paul Castellano, who has not been caught off guard by anything in 26 months, notices a feeling he no longer has the right vocabulary for. Something that is not strategy. Something that is not control. Something that feels, dangerously, like curiosity. He does not know yet what that Tuesday afternoon will cost him. He does not know that the small girl beside him, his impossible, brilliant, grieving girl, is already running calculations of her own, and that Sarah just made the first mistake of what Kimberly has already decided will be a very short acquaintance. She made Kimberly feel something. And in Kimberly Castellano's experience, feeling something is always where the trouble starts. What he also doesn't know, what neither of them know, is that somewhere in Freehold on a Tuesday in September, something that cannot be planned or negotiated or controlled has already begun. And the only person in Rosie's diner who is completely unprepared for it is the one person who has spent 6 years preparing for everything. Kimberly. But before the water glasses start getting knocked over, before the grape juice finds its target, before 2 men from South Philly slide into a corner booth with coffee they will never drink, there is a story you need to understand. The story of how one little girl built a system designed to protect the only love she had left. And what happens when a woman in a red apron doesn't read the rulebook? It started with Vanessa. 4 months after Elena Castellano was buried in a white dress in St. Rose of Lima Cemetery in Freehold, 4 months after the aneurysm that came without warning on a Wednesday morning while Elena was making coffee, while Kimberly was still in her pajamas watching cartoons, while Paul was 40 minutes away in a meeting he would spend the rest of his life wishing he had skipped, Paul brought home Vanessa. Kimberly was 6 months younger then. A different version of 6. Softer. She didn't know yet that soft was something you had to protect yourself from being. Vanessa arrived in November, which Kimberly would later decide was strategic, because November in Rumson is the kind of cold that makes a big house feel hollow, and Vanessa came with warmth the way a stage set comes with furniture, everything placed carefully, nothing quite real. She smelled like something that came in a heavy glass bottle. She spoke in a voice that had been polished so long it had lost whatever shape it started with. She touched things in the Rumson house with the particular lightness of a woman who was already deciding which ones she would rearrange. Kimberly watched her the way she had learned, in the past 4 months, to watch everything. Carefully. From a distance. Without letting her face say anything useful. She was not yet 6. But she had buried her mother. And grief, it turns out, is a ruthless education. She studied Vanessa the way a detective studies a crime scene, not looking for what was there, but for what didn't belong. The way Vanessa's smile came a half-second too late when Paul said something that surprised her. The way she looked at Kimberly like a variable she was calculating rather than a child she was meeting. The way she said Elena, once, carefully, in a conversation about the house, as if the name were something to be handled with tongs. Kimberly filed all of it. Said nothing. And then, on a Sunday dinner, when Vanessa was wearing a white Chanel blazer that cost more than most people's rent and was speaking in her polished voice about a trip to St. Bart's she thought Paul might enjoy, Kimberly reached across the table for the grape juice. And missed. Extensively. The blazer did not recover. Vanessa's composure recovered slightly faster than the blazer, which told Kimberly something about her priorities. 3 weeks later, almost exactly to the day, Kimberly reached for the grape juice again. She did not miss twice by accident. Here's what Kimberly never told anyone, because she was 6 and didn't have the language for it, and also because nobody asked. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was trying to be precise. Every woman Paul brought into their orbit got evaluated against a system Kimberly had never written down because she didn't need to. It lived in her chest, in the specific place that had gone quiet the morning the paramedics came, in the place she kept the memory of her mother's voice saying, "Kimmy, come eat," from the kitchen doorway in a tone that meant, "I see you, I've always seen you, you are the most important thing in this room." The system had 3 rules. The first, does she look at Dad like he's a prize she won? The women who did this had a particular expression, a proprietary brightness, like they were already calculating what access to Paul Castellano was worth and finding the number satisfying. Kimberly could identify it in under 30 seconds. It meant the woman had come for Paul's world, not for Paul. It meant she would stay until the world stopped being useful, and it meant she would erase whatever was inconvenient in the meantime. Kimberly's memory of her mother was inconvenient. Strike 1. The second, does she ignore me until it's convenient to be sweet? This was the most common failure. The women who passed Rule 1 often stumbled here. They would walk into the Rumsen house and aim their warmth at Paul, and then, when they noticed Paul noticing whether they were warm to Kimberly, they would pivot. The pivot was always visible. It had a mechanical quality, like watching someone remember a stage direction. Oh, right. The child. And then the sweetness would arrive, slightly too bright, slightly too much, calibrated to be witnessed rather than felt. Kimberly accepted none of it. Strike 2. The third rule was the one nobody survived. Does she talk about my mom like she was a problem that got solved? It wasn't always explicit. Usually it was a rearrangement. A subtle overriding. A suggestion, offered gently and reasonably, that perhaps the house could use some updating, said while standing in a room where Elena had chosen every color, every curtain, every specific angle of every piece of furniture. A comment that the photograph on the mantel might be better somewhere more private. A tone that treated Elena's presence in the house as a phase Paul needed to move through rather than a life that had actually existed, that had laughed in that kitchen and slept in that bed and made coffee on a Wednesday morning without any idea it was the last one. Strike 3. Every woman struck out. Kimberly made sure of it. Rebecca lasted the longest. 19 days. A Philadelphia attorney with sharp posture and a sharper vocabulary and the kind of confidence that came from winning arguments for a living. She was, Kimberly would grudgingly acknowledge in the private courtroom of her own mind, harder to read than the others. She didn't look at Paul like a prize. She didn't pivot toward Kimberly with manufactured sweetness. She was direct and unsentimental, and she treated the Rumsen house with the brisk respect of someone accustomed to walking into unfamiliar environments and assessing them efficiently. For 11 days, Kimberly watched and could not find the angle. On the 12th day, she found it. Rebecca was in the living room waiting for Paul when Kimberly came downstairs and found her standing in front of the mantel, head tilted, studying the framed photograph of Elena with the critical expression of a woman making a spatial decision. The throw pillows she had brought, a housewarming gesture, she had called it, setting them on the couch with a smile, were cream and sage. Elena's photograph was in a dark wood frame against the cream wall, and Rebecca was calculating whether the frame clashed. She reached for it. She moved it 6 inches to the left, toward the edge of the mantel. Toward the edge. Kimberly stood in the doorway and did not say a word. She waited. She was very good at waiting now. At Sunday dinner the following week, with Paul's assembled crew around the long table in the dining room, 12 men and their wives, all of them performing the particular casual ease of people who are always, underneath it, conducting business, Rebecca made a small error. She laughed at something Sal DiMaggio said, leaned toward Paul, and touched the table the way people touch things they are beginning to believe belong to them. Kimberly set down her fork. She looked at Rebecca across the table with the calm, clear expression of a child who has already decided. Then, in the specific silence between one conversation and the next, she said, to no one in particular, in her clearest, most carrying voice, "She smells like someone who lies for a living." The table went very quiet. Paul's jaw set. Rebecca's smile stayed on her face for approximately 4 seconds through sheer professional discipline before it began to show the strain. She did not return Paul's calls after that. Kimberly did not feel guilty. She filed the outcome, noted the method, and returned to her dinner. What she did not file, what she would never have the language for, not at 6, not for years, was the thing that happened every night after the women left and the house went quiet again and Paul sat in the living room with the television on and the sound off and his eyes on the middle distance. She would come downstairs, sometimes, and sit beside him. Neither of them would speak. The photograph of Elena was back in the center of the mantel. Kimberly checked every time, and the cream and sage throw pillows were in a closet somewhere and the house was exactly as it had been, exactly as Elena had made it. And Kimberly would sit next to her father in the quiet, and she would feel 2 things at once that she had no words for. Relief. Because the house was still theirs. Because her mother's face was still on the mantel. Because nothing had been overwritten yet. And something else. Something that lived underneath the relief like a note played in a lower register. Fear. The specific fear of a child who has learned, faster than any child should, that the people you need the most can simply stop being there. Without warning. Without reason. On a Wednesday morning, while the coffee is still brewing. She was not protecting her mother's memory to be cruel. She was protecting it because it was the last thing she had that proved her mother had been real. She didn't have many memories, she'd been too small, but she had the feeling of her. The warmth of a voice from a doorway. The specific safe weight of arms she could no longer fully picture. If someone replaced her, truly replaced her, settled in and rearranged and overwrote, then that life would become something that had simply ended. A chapter. A previous version. And Kimberly was not ready for her mother to be a previous version. She didn't think she would ever be ready. So she sharpened her system, and she waited, and she struck out every single woman her father brought home. She was very good at it. She intended to keep being good at it, which is why, on the Thursday of the week Paul first visited Rosie's diner, when he came home smelling like diner coffee instead of the steakhouse in Hoboken, Kimberly noticed. She didn't say anything. She filed it. On Saturday, he went back. She heard him tell his driver a time. She filed that too. On Sunday morning, Sunday, which was their morning, the one that belonged to the Rumson kitchen and Paul's particular scrambled eggs and the newspaper he read out loud to her in voices for the different columnists, he was distracted. His coffee went cold. He checked his phone twice. Kimberly watched him from across the kitchen table with the particular stillness of a child running an internal calculation at speed. She knew what distraction looked like on her father's face. She had catalogued every version of it over the past 2 years, the way you catalog weather patterns when weather has started to feel dangerous. She knew his distracted by business face and his distracted by grief face and his distracted by a problem he hasn't solved face. This was none of those. This was new. She picked up her orange juice. Set it down. Picked it up again. A diner, she thought. Off Route 9. A waitress. She had run the operation against socialites and attorneys and the carefully curated women her father's associates occasionally suggested with the practiced casualness of people who were, in fact, not being casual at all. She had run it in penthouses and restaurants and the formal dining room of the Rumson house. She had never run it in a diner. She began to consider the specific adjustments this would require. The water glasses at diners, she knew, were not crystal. They were the kind that shattered less elegantly. She would need a different approach. She picked up her orange juice again and considered the problem with the focused calm of a general reviewing terrain she has not yet seen but is already, methodically, beginning to plan. By the time Paul brought her back to Rosie's the following Sunday, deliberately, which she also noticed, Kimberly Castellano was ready. What she was not ready for was Sarah. Nobody ever is. Paul brought her on a Sunday. Kimberly knew it was deliberate. He had that particular set to his jaw, not tense, not casual, but carefully neutral, which in Paul Castellano's face meant he was testing something he hadn't decided to name yet. He held the diner door open. He gestured her in first. She walked through it like she was walking into a deposition. Armed. Not careless. Not clumsy. Kimberly had never been clumsy a day in her life. She was her father's daughter, which meant she understood that the difference between an accident and a message was simply whether you meant it. She reached across the table with the deliberate slightly too far extension of a child who had rehearsed the geometry, and the glass went over cleanly. Water spread across the laminate in a satisfying sheet. She sat back. Folded her hands. Waited. Every woman before Sarah had responded in one of two ways. The fussers made noise, oh no, oh goodness, let me, here, performing concern in a way that was really just performing for Paul. The cold ones went still and tight and revealed, in that tightness, exactly how much patience they were extending and exactly how they expected it to be repaid. Both answers told Kimberly everything. Sarah appeared with a fresh glass and a dry cloth. She wiped the table in two practiced motions, no drama, no pause, and set the glass down. Then she looked at Kimberly with complete, unironic sincerity and said, "Girl, that was a good spill. Real commitment. You've got strong wrists." Kimberly stared at her. She had prepared for annoyance. She had prepared for sweetness. She had not, in any version of this she had rehearsed, prepared for respect. Sarah was already moving to the next table. Kimberly looked at the new glass. Said nothing. Filed it. When Sarah came back to take their order, Kimberly deployed the 1,000-yard stare, the one she had perfected across 2 years of adult dinners and Sunday crew gatherings. The gaze that said, "I see through you and I am not impressed by what I find." She answered in monosyllables. She did not smile. She looked slightly past Sarah's shoulder at a fixed point on the wall behind her, which she had found communicated a more complete indifference than simply looking away. Sarah didn't push. Didn't perform patience. Didn't try harder. She simply set a small dish of strawberries beside Kimberly's elbow, unprompted, unannounced, and walked away. Kimberly looked at the strawberries. She had not told anyone here that strawberries were her favorite. She had not told anyone here anything. She ate every one. Slowly. Without expression. Paul stepped outside to take a call, one hand up, apologetic, the universal signal of a man whose phone is always more urgent than the room he's in. Kimberly waited until the door closed behind him. Then she turned on her stool, leaned across the counter with the measured calm of someone who has decided to end a negotiation, and looked directly at Sarah. "He's not available," she said. "He's still in love with my mom." It landed the way she intended it to land. Flat. Final. A fact presented without cruelty because it didn't require cruelty, it was simply true, and Kimberly had found that true things, delivered plainly, did more damage than anything theatrical. She watched Sarah's face for the flinch. For the careful redirect. For the rehearsed line about understanding and taking things slowly and not wanting to intrude on anyone's grief. Sarah stopped what she was doing. Set down the coffee pot. Looked at Kimberly, not past her, not around her, directly at her, the way very few adults ever actually did. Then she said, "She sounds like she was worth loving. Not a pivot. Not a performance. No, of course, or I completely understand, or any of the managed, cushioned language adults used when they were really just waiting for a child to finish talking. Just that. She sounds like she was worth loving." Kimberly sat with it. The diner moved around her, coffee poured, orders called, the grill hissing behind the window, and she sat completely still in the middle of it and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Like someone had looked at her mother and seen a person instead of a complication. She picked up her fork. She said nothing else. But when Paul came back through the door, Kimberly's hand was not near the water glass. It stayed in her lap for the rest of the meal. From the corner of the room, Paul Castellano watched all of it. He watched the spill and Sarah's response. He watched Kimberly eat the strawberries with the studied nonchalance of a child pretending she hadn't been disarmed. He watched the exchange at the counter, couldn't hear it, didn't need to. He read rooms for a living. He read people the way other men read contracts, looking for the clause that changes everything. He saw his daughter's hand move away from the glass. He looked at Sarah moving back through the diner, tray balanced, already on to the next table. He picked up his coffee. For the first time in a very long time, Paul Castellano did not know how the next move was going to go. He found, disturbingly, that he didn't mind. Paul Castellano has not cried since the funeral. This is not a decision he made consciously. It is simply a fact about his world, the same way certain other facts are true, that rooms go quiet when he enters them, that his phone is answered on the first ring, that the men around him are always, underneath whatever they are saying, assessing. Weakness in his world is not a private matter. It is information. And information, in the wrong hands, costs lives. So he performs composure the way he was trained to perform it, from the jaw out. Controlled voice. Steady hands. The particular stillness of a man who has learned that stillness reads as power even when it is really just the effort of holding everything in place. 26 months of it. He is very good at it by now. He is exhausted by it in a way he has not told anyone, because there is no one to tell. He goes back to Rosie's on a Wednesday. Then Friday. He tells himself it is proximity. The drive from Newark sometimes runs through Freehold. It is not out of the way, it is simply a logical stop. He tells himself this with the same conviction he uses for things he actually believes. It is not the food. He is clear-eyed enough to know that. Freehold diners do not compete with the places Paul normally eats. The coffee is adequate. The eggs are fine. The pie is genuinely good, but that is not the reason either. The reason is something he cannot categorize, which is itself the problem, because Paul Castellano categorizes everything. It is how he has survived. Every person, every room, every conversation gets filed, useful, not useful, threat, asset, neutral. The system has never failed him. Sarah doesn't file. She has not looked at his watch once. Not the first visit, not the third. Most people look at the watch within 90 seconds. It is a reflex, a calibration, the moment they decide what category he belongs in. Sarah refills his coffee with the same efficiency she refills the trucker at the counter and the retired couple by the window. If she Googled him after the first visit, and she may have, he has no way of knowing, it did not change the angle of her attention by a single degree. She treats him like a person who ordered coffee. Paul Castellano cannot tell you the last time someone treated him like a person who ordered coffee. It is, he decides on the Wednesday visit, the most disorienting experience he has had since the morning of Elena's funeral, when he stood in front of 200 people and delivered a eulogy in a voice that did not break because he could not afford for it to break, and nobody in that room understood that the composure was not strength. It was the only thing standing between him and the complete structural failure of everything he was responsible for holding together. He thinks about Elena at Rosie's. This surprises him. He has spent 26 months managing what he thinks about and when, filing grief into scheduled increments the way his attorneys file paperwork, necessary, contained, processed at designated times so it doesn't contaminate the operational hours. He is much disciplined about it. But something about the particular quality of light in Rosie's on a Wednesday afternoon, or the sound of the diner moving around him, ordinary, unhurried, indifferent to his presence, something opens a door he keeps locked, and Elena walks through it without asking. Elena laughing at the kitchen table in Rumson over something Kimberly said, the specific laugh that started silent before it found sound. Kimberly taking her first steps across the linoleum floor of the old apartment in Hoboken, listing badly to the left, determined in the way she has always been determined, like failure is simply not a framework she's willing to operate inside. Elena's hand on the back of his neck in the specific way she had, not romantic, just present. I know you're here, I know what it costs, I see you anyway. He has not let himself think about her hand on the back of his neck in 26 months. He sits in the corner booth at Rosie's on a Wednesday and thinks about it for a long moment. Then Sarah appears to refill his coffee, and she doesn't ask if he's okay, she just refills it, and somehow the not asking is the kindest thing anyone has done for him in longer than he can calculate. He stays until closing. He's not sure when he decided to. He looks up at some point and the diner has emptied around him, last customers gone, chairs going up on tables at the far end of the room, the grill quiet behind the service window. He should leave. He has a driver outside who has been waiting without complaint for 2 hours and a call with his Newark attorney at 8 that he has not prepared for. He doesn't move. Sarah comes around the counter with a cloth, wiping tables in the efficient, automatic way of someone whose body knows this job without being asked. She reaches his table. Stops. Looks at him with the direct, unperformed expression he has come to understand is simply how her face works, no calculation behind it, no angle being played. He asks her, quietly, whether she'd want to get coffee somewhere after her shift. She looks at him for a long beat. Long enough that he reads it, files it, waits. Then she looks at the diner around her, the counter, the booths, the particular worn warmth of a room that has been hers for 7 years, and she says, "I've got coffee right here. And I'm off in 20 minutes. She reaches behind the counter and pulls out a stool. Sets it down across from him. Then she goes back to closing up, moving through the diner in the easy unhurried way of a woman who is not performing anything for anyone. Paul looks at the stool. He looks at his phone, the Newark attorney, the driver outside, the operational hours he is supposed to be protecting. He puts the phone face down on the table. He waits. And in 20 minutes, when Sarah pours 2 cups of coffee and sits down across from him in the empty diner with the easy manner of someone who has decided something without making a production of it, Paul Castellano feels a thing he has not felt in 26 months of performed composure and managed grief in rooms that go quiet when he enters them. He feels like a person sitting across from another person. That is the beginning of everything. The rain started around 2 o'clock and hadn't decided to stop. Kimberly was in the back booth with her backpack open and her spelling homework spread across the table, doing the thing she did with schoolwork that her teacher called focus and that Kimberly understood as simply the mechanics of being somewhere in your body while your mind ran quietly in a different direction. She spelled the words. She thought about other things. She was good at both simultaneously. Paul was late. He had texted, which meant his driver had texted on his behalf, which meant the meeting in Newark had gone long in the way meetings in Newark always went long, which meant another hour at least. Kimberly had ordered hot chocolate and was rationing it with the discipline of someone who understood that the moment it was gone the waiting became a different kind of waiting. Sarah was at the counter restocking sugar dispensers, moving through the task with the automatic ease of a woman whose hands know what to do without being supervised. The Wednesday afternoon crowd had thinned to almost nothing. Rain did that to Freehold, drove people home early, kept them there. The bell above the door sounded at 3:47. Kimberly didn't look up. She heard the door constantly, it was background, furniture, the diner's punctuation. But something made her look up anyway. Some frequency in the way the room shifted, the way Sarah's hands slowed almost imperceptibly over the sugar dispensers. 2 men. Neither of them was from Freehold. It wasn't the clothes, though the clothes were wrong for the diner. It was the way they moved to a table, backs to the wall, facing the door, the instinctive positioning of men who had learned to sit that way so long ago it no longer looked deliberate. It just looked like how they sat. They picked up menus they didn't read. They ordered coffee they didn't drink. Kimberly put her pencil down. She watched Sarah the way she had taught herself to watch everything, quietly, from stillness, without moving her head enough to signal attention. She watched Sarah approach their table with the practiced pleasantness of a woman who has served every kind of person this diner has ever seen and knows how to keep her face neutral while her mind works. She couldn't hear what they said. She didn't need to. She could see the exact moment Sarah's hands went still. It was not dramatic. It was barely visible, a quarter-second pause in the automatic motion of a woman who was never still, a slight adjustment in how she was holding the coffee pot, a change in the quality of her attention that looked from a distance like nothing at all. Kimberly had spent 2 years learning to read adults in the specific space between what their faces said and what their bodies betrayed. Sarah's body was saying something her face was not. The men spoke. Sarah listened with her server's smile in place, pleasant, professional, a smile that gave nothing and committed to nothing. Then she said something short. She refilled the coffee they wouldn't drink. She walked back toward the counter. Into the kitchen. Kimberly sat completely still in the back booth and watched the kitchen door swing shut behind her. She could feel her own heartbeat in a way that was new and not entirely comfortable. She understood something was wrong the way children understand things, not through reasoning but through the body, through some inherited animal knowledge that the air in the room had changed quality. The 2 men sat with their backs to the wall and their eyes on the door and did not touch their coffee. Kimberly looked at them. Then at the kitchen door. Then at her spelling homework, which suddenly seemed very far away. She stayed still. She waited. She was very good at waiting. 11 minutes later, she didn't know it was 11 minutes, she only knew it felt like the longest configuration of minutes she had experienced since the morning the paramedics came. The front door of Rosie's diner opened and Paul walked in, and behind him 2 of his associates, and the men from South Philly looked at the door and made a calculation and were gone through the back before any scene could develop. No sirens. No raised voices. Just a table with 2 untouched coffees and then, very quickly, absence. Paul spoke to his associates in the low, efficient shorthand of men who handle things regularly. Then he came to the counter, spoke to the other waitress, and pushed through the kitchen door. He found them on overturned milk crates behind the prep station. Sarah had her arm around Kimberly. Kimberly was asleep against Sarah's shoulder, not peacefully asleep, but the sudden collapsed sleep of a child whose body decided the emergency was over before her mind caught up. Her spelling homework was still in her hand, crumpled where she'd gripped it. Sarah looked up when Paul came through the door. Her expression was not fear. It had moved past fear into something more complicated and more permanent, the particular look of a person who had been afraid, who had stayed anyway, and who had made a decision somewhere in the staying that had changed the internal landscape without asking permission. She had pulled Kimberly into the kitchen with her. She had locked the door. She had sat on a milk crate in the dark with her arm around a child who had spent weeks trying to make her life difficult, and she had stayed there, steady and present, until it was over. She met Paul's eyes across the kitchen. Neither of them said anything. Paul looked at his daughter, at the specific way she was leaning into Sarah's shoulder, the absolute unguarded trust of it, the way her small hand had found Sarah's sleeve in her sleep and held on. He had not seen Kimberly hold on to anyone like that. Not in 26 months. Not since the last time Elena held her, before Elena stopped being a person who could hold her. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Sarah didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't perform the moment or offer it to him with commentary. She just sat with his daughter in the quiet of the kitchen while the rain continued against the roof, steady and indifferent, and held on right back. Paul's instincts told him it was too soon. He invited her anyway. He framed it to himself as practical. Sarah would encounter his world eventually, and it was better to control the conditions than to let the conditions develop on their own. This was how he justified most decisions that were actually made somewhere below the level of strategy. He was aware of the gap between his reasoning and his reasoning. He invited her anyway. The Rumson house on a Sunday meant 12 people minimum. It meant his sister Donna, who had opinions the way other people had furniture, accumulated over years, arranged for display, never questioned. It meant the wives of 3 associates, who operated as a unit when assessing new variables in Paul's life and who had, over the years, demonstrated a collective precision that he privately respected and publicly managed carefully. It meant food and wine and conversation that was always, underneath, something else. It was not a welcoming environment for someone who didn't know the architecture. Sarah showed up in a clean blouse and dark jeans. She brought a peach pie she had baked herself, from scratch, lattice top, still faintly warm in the dish she carried with both hands. She handed it to Paul at the door without ceremony and said she was raised to never arrive empty-handed. She said it the way she said most things, simply, without footnotes. Paul took the pie. Looked at it for a moment. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had brought something made by hand to this house. Donna began within 10 minutes. She had the gift of making interrogation sound like curiosity, the warm, interested tone of a woman who simply wanted to know everything about you, deployed in the precise sequence designed to establish, through your own answers, exactly where you ranked. She asked about Sarah's neighborhood and freehold with the faint emphasis of someone who knew its zip code and what that zip code meant. She asked about Sarah's family background with the attentiveness of a woman filing information rather than receiving it. She asked about Sarah's education in the careful way that made the question itself the point. The wives followed Donna's lead with the practiced ease of women who had done this many times. They circled with polished pleasantness, each question another degree of the same slow rotation. At the far end of the table, Kimberly watched. She had her fork in her hand and her eyes moving between Sarah and Donna with the quiet calculation of a child who had seen this performance from the other side many times and knew exactly how it ended. She had watched Vanessa attempt to match Donna's register and fail. Vanessa had the vocabulary but not the stillness, and Donna could smell effort the way certain animals smell fear. She had watched Rebecca try to out-credential the room, listing her firm, her cases, and her Philadelphia address, which only confirmed to everyone present that she felt she needed to. The table had closed around both of them like water closing over a stone. Kimberly waited for Sarah to do the same thing. To reach for something, status, charm, humor, deflection. Any of the tools people picked up when Donna's table made them feel the floor shifting underneath them. Sarah ate her dinner. She answered questions without amplifying them. She didn't oversell her neighborhood or apologize for it. She didn't perform modesty about the diner or dress it up into something it wasn't. She sat in the chair she was given and occupied it completely, without shrinking into it or expanding beyond it, and the particular quality of her stillness was not the stillness of someone enduring, it was the stillness of someone who simply had nowhere she needed to be other than exactly here. Donna noticed. Donna adjusted. Donna reached for the sharpest thing she had. She said it lightly, the way the most pointed things are always said, a comment about Sarah's work clothes being her Sunday best, delivered with a smile that was engineered to leave a mark without appearing to try. The table held its breath in the way tables do when everyone has heard the thing and is waiting to see what it does. Sarah set her fork down softly. She took a sip of water. She looked at Donna with an expression that was not wounded and not hardened and not performing either of those things. She said, "Honey, I've been on my feet 12 hours a day since I was 19. I'm not ashamed of a single minute of it. Not defensive. Not sharp. Completely, utterly at peace with every word." The table released its breath. Donna smiled with her mouth and moved on, which was the closest she came to conceding anything. At the far end of the table, Kimberly put her own fork down. She looked at Sarah, really looked, the way she had looked at very few people in her life, and felt something move in her chest without her permission. It was not a large movement. It was the specific internal shift of a child encountering something true that rewrites, without asking, something she believed. She knew this quality. She had seen it in only one other person in her life, the ability to walk into a room designed to make you smaller and remain, without effort or performance, exactly the size you actually were. The ability to be looked at with the intention of diminishing and to simply not be diminished. Not through armor. Not through aggression. Through some bedrock knowledge of yourself that other people's opinions could not actually reach. She had seen it in her mother. She sat with this for the rest of the dinner. She did not speak. She ate her food and she sat with the thing that had moved in her chest, and she did not look at Sarah again because she was not ready for what looking again might confirm. When the evening ended and coats were gathered and the door opened to the cold Rumson night, Kimberly moved through the hallway with the general purposefulness of a child navigating adult goodbyes. She passed Sarah at the door, Sarah mid-sentence, thanking Paul, the peach pie dish clean, and returned under her arm. Kimberly passed close enough that their hands were briefly adjacent. She bumped Sarah's hand with her own. Small. Barely perceptible. The kind of contact that could be the doorframe, could be the crowd, could be anything at all. It was not an accident. Sarah's sentence didn't break. Her expression didn't change. But her hand, for just a moment, turned slightly outward, an instinctive half-opening, a response so small it was almost not a response at all. Kimberly was already down the hallway before anyone could observe the exchange, moving with the deliberate ease of a child who had not just done something significant. She went upstairs. She did not look back. But in the quiet of her room, in the dark, she lay with her hands folded on her chest and thought about a woman who had sat at her father's table and been aimed at from every direction and had not moved a single inch from the center of herself. She thought about her mother's laugh from the kitchen doorway. She thought about the specific weight of Sarah's shoulder in the back of Rosie's kitchen, in the dark, while the rain came down and she pretended to be asleep. She did not think about the checklist. For the first time in 2 years, she forgot to. Kimberly started with the drawing. She left it on the far end of the counter, in the specific section of real estate that belonged to Sarah's side work, the place where Sarah restocked and sorted and set up for the next rotation. Kimberly left it face down under the edge of a napkin holder, technically forgotten, positioned with the precise carelessness of a child who had thought about the placement for longer than she would ever admit. It was a drawing of a diner. Crayons. The figure behind the counter had red in her uniform and auburn hair. Kimberly had spent considerable effort on the hair. She did not look at the counter for the rest of that afternoon. She did her homework with great focus and left without mentioning the drawing and told herself firmly that she had simply forgotten it, which was a thing that happened. The following week she left a piece of Halloween candy, a Reese's, which was the good kind, beside the register. She set it down while Sarah was in the kitchen and walked back to her booth with the unhurried pace of someone who had done nothing in particular. She would have denied both gestures under any questioning. She had the denials prepared. Sarah never asked. The salting had started 6 weeks ago. Twice, while Sarah's back was turned during the morning setup, Kimberly had reached across the counter and added a careful measure of salt to Sarah's personal coffee, the one Sarah poured for herself at the start of a shift and nursed between tables. It was low-grade warfare, efficient and deniable. Kimberly had considered it her most elegant operation. She stopped. She stopped on the Tuesday after the Rumson dinner, without announcing the ceasefire, without any formal acknowledgement that a ceasefire was occurring. She simply did not reach for the salt. The next Tuesday, the same. She told herself she had lost interest in the tactic, which was partially true in the way that things are true when they are covering something else. Sarah poured her own coffee. Drank it without incident. Did not remark on the improvement. But the following afternoon, when Kimberly slid into her regular booth, there was already a small dish of strawberries at her elbow. Sarah hadn't asked. Hadn't announced them. Hadn't done anything so obvious as make eye contact about them. She had simply set them there the way she set out salt and pepper, like they belonged, like this was how things were now. Kimberly looked at the strawberries for a moment. She ate them. She said nothing. She understood, in the precise and unspoken language of people who are negotiating without negotiating, that something had been acknowledged by both of them and that neither of them would be naming it out loud. This was acceptable. It was a Thursday when she asked. Sarah was cleaning the tables adjacent to Kimberly's booth, working in the unhurried methodical way of someone whose hands had done this 10,000 times. Kimberly had her math homework open and was not doing it. She was watching Sarah from the sideways angle she used when she was thinking about something she hadn't decided to say yet. She said it. "Is your mom still alive?" Sarah stopped. Not the barely visible half-stop of someone caught off guard, a full stop, cloth in hand, a moment of genuine stillness before she pulled out the chair across from Kimberly and sat down in it. She didn't check whether she had other tables. She just sat. "No," she said. "She passed when I was 12. Kimberly absorbed this without expression, the way she absorbed all true things, completely, without leaking any of it back out through her face. "What did you do?" Sarah looked at the table for a moment, then back at Kimberly. "I kept going. Worked in my aunt's kitchen in Asbury Park. Figured out how to get through the back half of childhood mostly on my own." She said it without self-pity, which Kimberly noted and respected. Self-pity was not useful. Kimberly had decided this early. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. Then Kimberly asked the thing she had been carrying for 26 months in the place she kept things too heavy for regular pockets. "Did it stop hurting?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She didn't reach for the answer that was available, the comfortable answer, the answer adults usually gave children about pain because they wanted the conversation to end somewhere bearable. Kimberly had received that answer many times. She recognized its shape and had stopped believing it. Sarah looked at her directly and said, "It changed shape." "That's not the same as stopping." But the new shape is something you can carry. Kimberly sat with this. She turned it over the way she turned over true things, carefully, examining it from each angle, checking it for the soft spots that rehearsed dancers always had. She found none. It changed shape. Not smaller. Not gone. A different shape. Something you could carry. She nodded once. Slowly. Filed it in the place she kept only for things that were actually true. She looked back down at her math homework. Sarah stood, picked up her cloth, and went back to the adjacent table. Neither of them said anything else. Paul had come in through the front 10 minutes earlier. Sarah hadn't seen him. Kimberly hadn't seen him. He had stopped in the doorway when he understood what he was watching, stopped with his coat still on and his keys in his hand, reading the room with the trained precision of a man who survives by reading rooms, and then stood very still and did not announce himself. He watched his daughter ask the question he had not been able to ask himself in 26 months. He watched Sarah answer it without flinching. He watched Kimberly nod, once, slowly, and file something away in the private place she kept things, the place that had been sealed since the morning the paramedics came and had not, as far as he knew, admitted anything new. Something moved in his chest. Not the controlled, managed movement of a grief he scheduled and contained. Something older than that. Something that had been sealed behind 26 months of performed composure and adequate coffee and empty houses and the relentless operational requirement of being a man who did not come apart. It moved. It opened, slightly, the way a door opens when the pressure on both sides finally equalizes. He stood in the doorway of Rosie's diner on a Thursday afternoon and felt it happen and did not try to file it anywhere. He let it be what it was. He made the decision in a parking lot. Newark, Thursday morning, 6:42 a.m., the kind of cold that gets inside a coat rather than staying on the surface of it. Paul had been standing outside the warehouse for 4 minutes after the meeting ended, his breath visible, his phone in his hand with 3 messages he hadn't answered. The South Philly situation had moved in the past 2 weeks from a pressure to a threat, from a threat to something more specific and more proximate, and Paul Castellano had survived long enough in his world to know the difference between a warning and a countdown. Sarah's name had come up in a conversation it had no business being in. He stood in the parking lot and made the calculation with the cold clarity of a man who had made calculations like this his entire career, who had learned, at significant cost, that sentiment applied to the wrong variable got people hurt. Sarah was the wrong variable. Sarah was a woman who baked pies from scratch and told his daughter true things and had sat on a milk crate in the dark holding a child who was not hers without being asked. Sarah was a woman who served coffee in Freehold and had not signed up for the specific category of danger that attached itself to people Paul Castellano kept close. He had no right to keep her close. He drove to Freehold at closing time. The last customer left at 9:51. Paul waited until the door swung shut, then crossed the diner in the particular silence of a room emptying out, chairs up on half the tables, the grill cold, the overhead lights already dimmed at the far end. Sarah was behind the counter with her back to him, restocking. She heard him. He knew she heard him because her hands slowed, almost nothing, almost invisible. She turned around. He told her quietly. He used the voice he used for difficult conversations, controlled, even, stripped of everything extraneous. He told her it was over. That the situation had changed in ways he couldn't detail and wouldn't burden her with. That she deserved a life she could live without checking the door every time it opened. That he was not built for ordinary and she was not built for his kind of extraordinary, and that this was the truth he should have said sooner, before it became harder to say. He said it cleanly. He had prepared it cleanly. Sarah listened to every word. She didn't argue. She didn't fill the silence with the things women sometimes filled it with, the appeals, the negotiations, the tears deployed as pressure. She listened with the same complete attention she brought to everything, and when he finished she was quiet for a moment, and then she tied her apron in the practiced motion of a woman returning to the work that was hers regardless of anything else. She said, "Okay, Paul." She picked up her tray. She walked back to the floor. Paul stood by the door with his coat half on and watched her go and felt the specific interior consequence of doing the right thing, which was that it felt almost identical to doing something unforgivable. He did not move. He was still standing there when the corner booth made a sound. He had forgotten she was there. This was the thing about Kimberly, she had learned, in 6 years of living in the margins of adult conversations, how to become part of the furniture. How to be so still, so quiet, so apparently absorbed in whatever was in front of her that the adults in the room stopped accounting for her presence. She had used this skill her entire life. She had never had cause to regret it until this moment, when it meant she had been in the corner booth for the entirety of what her father had just said, and there was no version of this where she hadn't heard every word. She slid out of the seat. Her white dress. Her white ribbons. Her face, which Paul now saw from across the diner, was not the face of a child who had just heard something upsetting. It was the face of a child who had been crying quietly in a corner booth for the last 4 minutes with the practiced containment of someone who had learned that crying loudly did not change outcomes. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking at her sides. She walked across the diner floor. Past the counter stools. Past the pie display. Past the regulars who looked up from their closing routines with the uncertain expressions of people witnessing something they couldn't categorize. She walked with the straight-backed deliberateness of a Castellano, which meant she walked like someone who had made a decision and was now simply executing it. She stopped in front of Sarah. Sarah turned. The diner went quiet in the organic, unplanned way that rooms go quiet when something real is happening in them, not because anyone decided to stop, but because the atmosphere changed and everyone felt it simultaneously. Kimberly looked up at Sarah. Her chin was steady. Her hands were not. She was 6 years old and she had buried her mother and chased off every woman who came near her father for 2 years with the focused efficiency of a general protecting a perimeter, and she was standing in the middle of a New Jersey diner in her white Sunday dress with her hands shaking at her sides, and she opened her mouth. "Please don't go." Her voice was the clearest, smallest voice she had ever used. Not a child's wail. Not a performance. Just the truth, delivered plainly, the way she had learned to deliver true things. "I'm sorry I was mean. I was scared." A breath. "Please, I don't want another fancy lady. I just want you. Please be my mom." The last word landed in the silence and stayed there. Sarah's tray hit the counter. The sound was soft, a clatter, not a crash, but in the silence of the diner it was the only sound in the world. Sarah's hands came up to her mouth. Her eyes, which had stayed dry through Paul's entire careful speech, did not stay dry now. Tears arrived before she had organized any response to them, before she had any of the composure she had maintained all evening, arriving with the particular speed of emotion that has been held for too long in too small a space. Paul had not moved from the doorway. He stood with his coat half on and his keys in his hand and did not move, because Paul Castellano had sat across from dangerous men in dark rooms and negotiated outcomes that most people would not survive understanding, and he did not have a framework for this. There was no framework for this. There was no version of his training that had prepared him for watching his daughter, his fierce, impossible, strategic, grieving daughter, stand in the middle of a diner and choose, for the first time in 2 years, to need someone out loud. Sarah knelt. She went down to Kimberly's level with the unhesitating motion of a woman who knew exactly what this moment required and was not going to make the child wait for it. She held Kimberly's face in both hands, the specific, complete hold of someone saying, "I see you, I have always seen you, you are the most important thing in this room," and she looked at her directly. She said, "I'm not going anywhere today, okay? Let's start right there." Kimberly pressed her face into Sarah's shoulder. She held on with both arms, the sudden total grip of a child who has been holding herself together by force of will for a very long time and has just, in one small moment in one small diner, decided to put it down. Sarah's arms closed around her without hesitation, without ceremony, without any of the careful navigation of a woman who was still deciding. They closed around her the way they had closed around her on the milk crate in the dark kitchen, with the same immediate and unconditional quality, the quality of someone for whom this particular child had already, without a formal decision being made, become someone she was not going to let go of. The diner stayed quiet. Paul watched his daughter hold on. He watched Kimberly's hands gripping the back of Sarah's uniform, white knuckles, the grip of someone who had decided and was not undeciding. He watched Sarah's arms around her and Sarah's eyes closed and the particular stillness of two people who have found, in each other, something they had both been missing the specific shape of. He thought about a parking lot in Newark at 6:42 in the morning and a calculation he had made with cold clarity. He looked at his daughter. He walked back to the nearest stool and sat down. He put his keys on the backyard of the Rumson house in April. 20 people, which in practice meant the people who mattered and none of the people who came with his world's social obligations. Donna sat in the third row in a dress she had clearly selected to communicate something, and kept her opinions to herself for what may have been the first time in her adult life. Paul's associates drank good wine and sat quietly and understood, without it being explained, that today belonged to a different version of Paul Castellano than the one they conducted business with, and that this version was not available for the other world today. They respected this with the pragmatic grace of men who knew how to read a room. Elena's photograph was inside the house, in its place on the mantel. It had always been in its place on the mantel. It would stay there. Sarah had never suggested otherwise. This was not a small thing, and Paul knew it, and he had told her so one evening, quietly, in the kitchen, and Sarah had looked at him with the direct and uncomplicated expression she reserved for things that required no elaboration. "She was Kimberly's mother," she said. "She was your wife. She doesn't disappear because I arrived." Paul had not found a response to this. He hadn't needed one. The flower girl situation was not up for discussion. Kimberly had announced it 48 hours after the engagement with the settled finality of someone issuing a briefing rather than making a request. She would be the flower girl. She had already considered and resolved any logistical questions. She did not require input. She selected her own dress, white tulle, the same cut she wore on Sundays, because she had decided at some point that white tulle was her signature and she was not deviating from her signature for a wedding. When Sarah gently noted that flower girls sometimes wore other colors, Kimberly looked at her with the patient expression of someone explaining something that should not require explanation. "It's my signature," she said. Sarah did not press the point. She walks ahead with the focused seriousness of a child executing a crucial mission. The rose petals are distributed with precision, not scattered carelessly but placed with the deliberate rhythm of someone who has thought about the spacing. She does not look at the guests. She does not perform for the 20 people watching from their seats in the Rumson backyard. She looks ahead, and she walks, and she does the job with the complete investment she brings to everything she decides matters. At the altar, she stops. She turns around. She watches Sarah come down the makeshift aisle in the April light, and her face does the thing it does when she has decided something permanently, the expression that has no performance in it, no calculation, no social management. Just the thing itself, whatever it is, held plainly. Sarah reaches them. Paul holds out his hand. Sarah takes it. And then Kimberly steps forward and takes both of their hands, one of Paul's, one of Sarah's, and holds them and looks up at the 20 people assembled in the backyard of the Rumson house and says, in her clearest carrying voice, "I picked her first. Just so everybody knows." Paul laughs. Not the controlled laugh. Not the board meeting laugh, the careful laugh, the laugh calibrated to communicate ease without vulnerability. The other one, the one that Elena used to say sounded like he forgot for a second to be careful. Full and helpless and real, arriving before he has the opportunity to manage it, the laugh of a man who has been caught completely off guard by joy in the backyard of his own house on a Tuesday in April. It moves through the assembled 20 people like something released. Sarah squeezes Kimberly's hand. She leans down to her level, the way she has always gone to Kimberly's level, without hesitation and without making a production of the gesture. She says, quietly enough that only Kimberly can hear it, "And I picked you right back." Kimberly absorbs this. Files it in the place she keeps only for true things, which has been receiving new material with increasing frequency over the past 6 months and has expanded accordingly. She nods once, with the slow gravity she reserves for things she is accepting as permanent. She keeps hold of both their hands. The ceremony continues. The officiate says the words that make things official, though the thing itself became official some time ago in the back kitchen of a diner on an overturned milk crate, or at a counter with a dish of strawberries that appeared without being requested, or in the smallest nod in the world from a 6-year-old girl who had never given an inch to anyone and gave one, almost imperceptibly, to a woman who asked if she was a pancake girl. The dogwoods along Route 9 are in full bloom. Inside Rosie's, the Tuesday lunch rush is underway. Table 4 wobbles. The coffee urns are temperamental. The board outside has the spring menu in Sarah's handwriting, and the regulars are ordering what they always order, and the bell above the door is doing what it always does, announcing arrivals, marking departures, sounding the small ordinary music of a place that has been the same and not the same for as long as anyone can remember. And in a backyard in Rumson, New Jersey, 3 people who came together through a blown tire and a Tuesday and the smallest nod in the world are standing in the April light holding hands. A mob boss. A waitress. A little girl in white tulle who picked first and knew it. A family, not the kind that arrives fully formed, but the kind that gets built from the inside out, one unplanned Tuesday at a time, in the specific and irreplaceable shape of the people who chose each other. The new shape of things. Something you can carry. Thanks for watching till the very end. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be dropping another unforgettable story tomorrow, so make sure you don't miss it.